In this video, we are going to cover oceanography, the composition of the oceans, the location of each of the oceans, as well as the topography of all of the oceans. Please make sure that you have your worksheet that I gave you in class so that way you can fill in the blanks as we go through the presentation. Please be sure, as I told you in class, that you need to have a parent sign off on your sheet on either the front or the back side, so I know that you went through this presentation and completed this work for your project that we are beginning on Thursday. Please also make sure that you bring this sheet with you to class on Thursday with the signature so that way you can use it for your project. As we begin our unit on oceanography, oceanography is the study of the oceans based on the knowledge of biology, chemistry, physics, and geology. So all of these things are taken into account as we study oceanography, which is, again, the study of the oceans. Within the category of oceanography, we have four basic concepts. Number one, oceans compose 71% of our Earth's surface. Number two, this 71% of our Earth's surface is approximately 140 million square miles. In the northern hemisphere where we live, 61% of the surface is water and the rest of it consists of the continents. In the southern hemisphere, almost 81% of the surface is water, because remember, most of the continents are located in the northern hemisphere, so that would mean the southern hemisphere consists mostly of water. Our four main ocean basins are the Pacific Ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, the Indian Ocean, and the Arctic Ocean, which we have already done the definition, so you can start to learn the locations of these four oceans. For the Pacific Ocean, as we learned when we did our vocabulary, is the largest and the deepest ocean, with it being 12,927 feet at its deepest point. The Atlantic Ocean is about half the size of the Pacific Ocean and relatively narrow compared to the Pacific Ocean. Remember, the Pacific Ocean is located on the west coast of the United States and touches Asia as well as Australia, and the Atlantic Ocean is on the eastern coast of the United States and touches Europe and Africa. The Indian Ocean is largely a southern hemisphere water body that touches Asia, Africa, and Australia, and the Arctic Ocean is the smallest and the shallowest of all of the oceans, as it is north of North America, Asia, and the Arctic Circle. We do have the fifth ocean, the Antarctic Ocean, but for our purposes, we are not going to worry about that one. For composition of seawater, remember the word composition means the makeup or the structure of the seawater. So seawater or salt water contains a variety of salts, metals, and other dissolved gases. The seawater or the salt water is unfit for human consumption and irrigation, because remember in the introductory video we watched, the salt water comes into our bodies and makes us thirstier because it is taking water out of the cells in our body. Seawater contains 3.5% by weight of dissolved salts. So this means 3.5 out of the 100 grams of water is salt, and the rest of it is water. The most abundant salt is sodium chloride, which we know as common table salt. Salinity is the total amount of dissolved material in seawater. So that would be the total amount of the salt in the seawater. We express this in percent like it was in the last slide, or parts per thousand. Sources of sea salts. So this is where the salt comes from as it enters the ocean. It comes from two different areas. Chemical weathering of the rocks on the continents when the wind and the water transport the salt into the ocean, as well as volcanic eruptions that release salt into the air as well as within the lava that eventually ends up in the oceans. Processes affecting salinity. Processes that add large amounts of fresh water to seawater, and processes that remove large amounts of fresh water from seawater. So we add large amounts of fresh water to seawater when the rivers are entering into the ocean and they're carrying the salts that they have dissolved from the rocks. And we also remove a large amount of fresh water from the seawater when it gets evaporated by the sun. Now remember, the salinity balance stays the same because no matter how much salt water we have, the amount of salt always stays in the ocean because the sun can only evaporate a liquid and not a solid. So we have a constant supply of fresh water being added and fresh water being removed due to rivers coming in, adding it, and the sun evaporating the fresh water and removing it. So the percent of seawater or salt water will always be the same. Mapping the ocean floor, which we worked on in class today, where we match the pictures up to their features. So mapping the ocean floor, there's a process we use called bathymetry to map the ocean floor. And bathymetry is the measurement of ocean depths and charting of the shape of the ocean floor, so that way oceanographers can understand and figure out what the ocean floor looks like. The ocean features volcanic peaks, deep trenches, plains, mountain chains, and plateaus. So it is very similar to the surface of the earth. This is just the surface of the ocean that is under the water. Our techniques that we use when we do bathymetry, we use what is called sonar, which is sound, navigation, and ranging. We have two types of sonar, echo sounders and multi-beam sonar, and both of these send the sound waves down to the floor of the ocean and bounce back to the ship, so that way they can map the ocean floor by the time it takes the sound waves to reach the ocean floor and come back. The ocean floor is broken into three main units. We have the continental margin, the ocean basin floor, and the mid-ocean ridge. So within those three categories are all of the features that we have to know. We have what's called passive continental margins, which consist of the continental shelf, the continental rise, and the continental slope, as well as the continent and the continental edge that we discussed during class. The continental shelf extends from the shoreline towards the deep ocean basin or the abyssal plain. This is the flooded extension of the continents, so this is still a part of the continents, but this is the part that is under the water that we cannot see. The continental shelf averages about 50 miles wide and 423 feet deep at its seaward edge, and it represents about 7.5% of the total ocean area. So about 7.5% of the ocean is part of the continents. The continental slope is the steep region or the zone that marks the boundary between the continental crust and the oceanic crust. It is a very narrow feature that averages about 12 miles wide. So this is from the edge of the continent that goes all the way down to the oceanic crust where the abyssal plain would be. An active continental margin is located primarily in the Pacific Ocean because this is where many of the volcanoes and earthquakes take place. So this is a very active continental margin. A deep ocean basin is the area that lies between the continental margin and the deep ocean ridge or the mid-ocean ridge. This covers almost 30% of the Earth's surface, and remember, we cannot see this because it is underneath the ocean water. This consists of the following three features: the deep ocean trench, the abyssal plain, and the seamount or the volcanic peak and volcanic islands. The deep ocean trenches are long, narrow troughs that are at the deepest part of the ocean. The deepest part of the world's ocean is the Challenger Deep, which is 36,163 feet. So these are the trenches where there is subduction occurring and the seafloor is being destroyed through subduction. On the abyssal plain, these are the flat features and the most level regions on the Earth. They exist in all four of the oceans. However, the Atlantic Ocean has more extensive abyssal plains than does the Pacific Ocean, which seems a little strange because the Pacific Ocean is larger, but the Atlantic Ocean has many more abyssal plains than the Pacific Ocean does. The seamount is an isolated volcanic peak, and remember, the seamount does not come up through the surface of the water. That is called the volcanic island. The seamount is found in all of the oceans, but the greatest number are located in the Pacific on the abyssal plain. The most well-known seamount is the Emperor Seamount Chain. And that concludes your notes portion of oceanography. So again, please make sure that you have filled in all of the blanks, and please make sure that your parents have signed off on this to indicate to me that you have done the required part of your project at home. Thank you very much, and I will see you guys tomorrow.